We're now going to switch. We've had great sessions looking at India. We've had great sessions looking at Saudi. We're now going to look at Africa. If the next two panelists would like to come up, their chair's almost ready. We're delighted to have Chris Miller from Shearwater. Chris Miller, formerly known as Shearwater, now JSSI Capital, Aviation Capital. Apologies. Please don't tell Neil. And Jeffrey Eminis from Fortier Aviation Consultants. Both of them extremely experienced in the region. Chris is financing a lot of aircraft there. Jeffrey on a advisory management and brokerage side. Come on, you've got a chair. Oh, we need your microphones though. And we're going to have a quick, and we'd love to have as many questions from the audience as possible. And I think as harder, the better. Okay. Jeffrey, you've been active in that market for a long time. I won't say how long. His father is South African aviation royalty. Mm-hmm. If you ever go to a South African air show, his dad will be providing the commentary.
Don't tell him that.
What are you seeing in the market at the moment?
For me, over the last few months, I've seen a lot of new aircraft coming in. So there is a 6500 that just got delivered into Ghana. There's a 3500 being delivered into South Africa. 7500's been ordered as well into Southern Africa. And a few helicopters that have gone in as well. So there seems to be newer aircraft coming in and long range. One of my customers just sold his 2000 LXS and has got a pre-owned ATEX coming in as well. So newer aircraft and longer range.
Chris, you're getting a lot of, you're a global financier. You always have been. How active are you in Africa?
Just in Africa, it's starting to pick up a little bit. So I think, with Nigeria being the biggest country in Africa and the largest population, about 223 million people, I don't want to say that drives it, but the election cycle kind of slows things down. And then after the elections, people feel more comfortable. And so there's always that kick there. But I am seeing more progress payment financings for newer, larger cabin aircraft, which for Africa, when you look at the roughly, say, 450 private jets that are in the country, a very small percentage are large cabin. But I think that's starting to shift a little bit with these newer aircraft that are being purchased. They're going to be delivering over the next couple of years.
Talking about elections, South Africa has got elections coming up in the next few weeks.
I mean, you talk about elections and so forth. That's a very valid point that Chris mentioned. I mean, obviously, after the Nigerian elections, we saw a lot more inquiries coming in, just generally for aircraft purchase. And also, keeping in mind, over the last 4 years, there have been 7 coups across the African continent. And I can imagine on the financing side, there's a lot of cash deals that happen, but it does make people quite nervous. And if you can't, have recourse on the asset. So there's been a lot of political instability, which I think is, of course, does affect on the financing side, but definitely we see interest.
Looking for, every cloud has a silver lining. Surely if a coup happens in the country next to you, you really need a jet?
You would think so. They normally land up in prison for a while, maybe only later.
We just need an OEM going, when you need to get out, we can get you out faster than anyone else. Chris, when you get a call from someone, and I know you're an alternative financier, actually, you've never worked for a formal bank, have you?
Oh, God, no. I think if I worked at a bank, I would last maybe a day or two.
But because you'd resign, they'd want to keep you. Are there any countries when someone comes to you, calls from, it's a big continent, are there any countries where someone calls you go, oh, I'm not going to look at that, or are you fairly open?
Well, that's one way to look at it, but as an asset-based financier and most financiers, you can mitigate the country of citizenship out of any transaction pretty much. So we don't really run into that a lot. It's more about reputational, like, Russia's off the list now, Iran's not on the, that's not on the list, North Korea. There's probably just a few smaller handful of of countries that we wouldn't look at the citizens. But that doesn't mean we're going to register an aircraft there. It's just that we'll look at pretty much anyone.
And are you happy with local operators, or would you rather they were with an ExecuJet or a Jet or a ACAM or I don't want to offend anyone, I should have stopped, Titan Aviation or everyone else?
And I think that's where, as an asset-based lender, so we don't really do credit-based loans. So the asset is really key. So we are very selective about the operators, and we use most of those guys that are kind of like on our approved list, but they've got to be much larger, reputable aircraft management companies that we're going to make our clients go to. And we really haven't found that been too much of a stumbling block with people, because if you give them a choice, then they can get the best deal.
Nigeria has been pretty quiet for the last, I guess, was it all election or was some of it currency and...
I think just generally a lot of instability, obviously in commodity oil prices, election, currency devaluation, and of course people were worried about being put into prison by the former government, and there seems to be a bit more freedom in that now. People feel it's a bit more stable and can take that leap.
So are you optimistic about Nigeria as a market?
I see a lot more going in there. How much of it actually converts is something else. And I think that's always the thing. I think the gentleman from Bombardier earlier spoke about noise. And unlike in other markets that I've seen, there isn't a lot of information generally available. So you're going a lot on hearing what pilots are talking about, what their owners are doing. Sort of the rumor mill spins up quite quickly. And that's when you know that there might be an opportunity for a deal, either on a pre-owned side or perhaps they're already discussing with an OEM on financing opportunities. So that's where I see that it's very fragmented, and that happens in each one of those countries. And you've got to have some boots on the ground to hear as to what's going on.
Chris, Nigeria for you?
Yeah, it's a market. We're in the process of closing a couple deals right now. We've done a lot of deals in Nigeria. Over the years. And I think one of the ongoing kind of obstacles for buyers, for the aircraft purchasers in those countries, and it's also in South Africa, which we've done a number of deals and have a lot of clients there right now, it's becoming increasingly more difficult for them just to get funds out of the country to pay these notes. And I think it's a challenge for every single one of them. Some clients figure it out a little bit better than others, but I see that as a little bit of a challenge. And I don't really see that getting too much better, especially in South Africa and Nigeria. I don't think it's going to fix itself.
We had it on one APA we were negotiating, and you have a clause in there that the South African Reserve Bank needs to do the approval. And when you're working with a seller who doesn't have those restrictions in place, and they can't really understand, and so you spend a lot of time educating around those restrictions, and you have the same in India.
Yeah. With the South African bank, they don't have a concept of a floating rate interest. So like when it goes month to month, it's like you can't predict what your payment's going to be.
No, although to be fair, a lot of South African aircraft buyers in the past have done it so they can have a punt on US dollar rand rate, haven't they?
Yeah, obviously the South African rand has been so volatile. Definitely, you can play the game.
This is a fun way to play the game. And South Africa, you're not as positive on, Chris?
I don't see it as active right now as other parts of Africa. But there's always demand there, just because, it's a country, is it 60 million people? And they have about the same amount of business jets there as they do in Nigeria. So it skews lots of the smaller, older business jets. I'm not seeing kind of newer, larger ones going into South Africa right now.
On the demand side, as I said, the ATEX going in is for a European gentleman. The 7500 that's allegedly going in is for a South African gent. And then South Africa generally, or Southern Africa, of course, is a commodity belt. So there's a lot going on generally around that. West Africa, and of course, which Nigeria forms part of that, is very interesting. Our friends at Vista have put two challenges out there now permanently, which are operating around this. As charter demand is very strong, and those charter customers hopefully eventually go into the ownership journey, or we've done quite a few block hour deals as well. So those customers want that guaranteed availability, Generally, availability on the continent is rare, and when you can get it, it can be at a premium because you're ferrying in great distances. I mean, people forget the size. And Cape Town to Cairo is 9 hours. So, there's definitely I see more and more demand, but it really comes down to availability on aircraft for sale or purchase and charter.
Chris, do you see a lot? Is it the least competitive aircraft finance market you're active in?
When you say least competitive, like having finance?
I can think of, is it the one where you've got, if I'm out there looking to fund an old G5 or an old Challenger,
Yeah.
I've got a lot less options probably in most African countries than I have in, even in Europe or Asia probably. Would you agree? And maybe Indonesia.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so oftentimes we're competing with, just because of an asset-based lender and our interest rates are obviously higher, we're competing mostly with the person's own cash. But yeah, there's places like in Indonesia and Malaysia, places like that, where it's very similar. But it's interesting, in Africa, where I see kind of some opportunity when you look at you take a step back and you look at it, there's just a lot of investment dollars going into those eastern countries in Africa, like Sudan, Kenya, and even Somalia, where it's infrastructure. And then we're seeing a lot of just airlines starting up and commercial aircraft coming in. So I think that, over the next handful of years, I think that for business aircraft, that eastern part of Africa, I think will be kind of surprisingly, growing demand.
When you have customers coming to you and saying they're going to look for funding, there's 3 South African banks who are active in the market, and then maybe a few local banks in other jurisdictions. It's not the most competitive aircraft finance market, is it?
No, I mean, when Chris was Guggenheim before, I'd reached out for a customer of mine who bought a Challenger, and in the end, they took the view just to finance it themselves and have less restrictions. And I was discussing with another lender earlier, the minute you say Africa, people sort of recoil. That's been an advantage for some of us who are working on the continent, because people are fearful of it. But there is, it is a continent of great opportunity, and I've always said that if you have the stomach for it, it's not perfect. But if you look around the rest of the world at the moment, it's not that great either. If you take that view on financing and so forth, so Chris is right. I mean, when we talk about East Africa, I didn't even touch on that. And when you look at, say, Kenya, Uganda, Somalia, all this rebuilding work that's going on, and the closer proximity to the Middle East, opposed to Western Africa, with its stronger links, shall I say, to Europe, definitely an opportunity.
Someone's saying, is the demand dominated by government, military, and a few corporates, or are you seeing individual buyers?
So the government stuff is always going to be very, very strong. I mean, like any government, the process of procurement takes a long time, and they generally tend to be larger aircraft. I mean, obviously Boeing and Airbus, there's quite a few of those in operation, particularly Boeing. I've seen more private individuals, personally, and I was discussing with Philip earlier today from UAS. There are a few corporates who are big corporates that are really struggling to fulfill their aviation requirements on the continent. And are looking at alternative methods now of ours again, or even went down the road of tendering for an aircraft acquisition, something they hadn't done before. So, it's definitely more corporates coming in and private individuals for me.
Chris?
For us, it's more individuals. We're seeing some companies, but it's if it is a company, it's one individual that owns it, so it's really him. So if a company gets too big and there's not one kind of majority owner, then it ends up being individuals for us.
And the arguments for business aviation, the connectivity, the flying into airports that you can't fly into, the lack of scheduled services, particularly for, say, a mining or a commodity company, the argument's pretty easy eventually.
But particularly in Africa, I mean, I don't like the word a private jet. I think as an industry we need to talk more about business aviation. because particularly, and you hit the nail on the head there, in Africa, yes, there is an element of flying privately or in a corporate aircraft that there is convenience, but it really is out of necessity. When I look at some of my mining customers in the past, you could not do what they do on an airline, or you cannot take a CEO of a company with 75,000 employees out for a week to go visit mines, within the DRC. And the corporate aircraft allows them to do that within 2 days, and the flexibility for very quick meetings with mining ministers, perhaps the head of state and so forth, which pop up regularly.
And the perception of African fleet being older, fair?
I think it, again, used to be the case when you saw a lot of the African fleet as what was younger has been sold out. Our Challenger got sold out into the US, and when you talk to ExecuJet or people like that, there's really no availability at the moment. So what you are left with, you have to contend with the year of manufacture, and you hope that you rather than go on a good operator who is maintaining it well, crewing it well. And at that point, age isn't as relative as that. Have that crew and that operator flown to that location before? Can you do it safely and successfully? In my opinion.
Chris?
Yeah, and I think what you're starting to see just over the last several years is the major OEMs, so Bombardier, Gulfstream, and Dassault, with the service centers and the spare parts and just the infrastructure that they're building, has helped facilitating the growth. And so it's just interesting, about a couple years ago, we had a client, like you were saying, who had a business in a couple different countries, so he just couldn't visit his businesses via commercial. It just wasn't really possible. So we ended up financing a Honda jet to him, and it was great for like 6 months, and then he realized it was the first Honda jet into Africa, and he realized that he had to fly it to Malta or to Europe to get service, so he ended up selling it within 11 months. So I think it just goes to the infrastructure. And you look at Gulfstream, if you look at the makeup of business aircraft there, not private jets, Bombardier and Dassault is pretty strong, and Gulfstream's just catching up. But I think it's all just about focusing on different parts of the world.
So if you talk to an Asian aircraft broker like David Dixon at Jetcraft, he talks about the perception that Chinese jets have corrosion. So when you put a Chinese, and this is David, not me saying this, so when you put a jet, an aircraft on the market, there's a perception it's probably, from a US buyer particularly. To be fair, a lot of US buyers have the same thing towards aircraft that have been in Europe. When you're financing an aircraft, do you expect it to be, if you've got an aircraft that's been in Nigeria for 5 years versus an aircraft that's been in Oklahoma for 5 years, it's going to be easier to sell the Oklahoman jet to a US buyer, isn't it?
Well, theoretically, and whether that's warranted or not is irrelevant, because if the perception is there, then it becomes real. And when it comes to dollars,
and by the way, I'm not saying it's what I think it's warranted.
Yeah, and from a financier perspective, that's in the back of our mind, but we're going to be doing a pre-purchase inspection relevant to the age of the aircraft that will uncover that. So it really shouldn't come into play. But I agree, the perception is there. It's hard to argue and fight that.
Our Challenger at the time went over to a US buyer, and of course there was some negative connotation to being an African owned and based aircraft, but it was maintained by Avconjet, and it was operated by Avconjet and maintained by General Atomics in just outside Munich, and so the buyer was very happy with that. And I think that is that key point of having a great operator who looks after the asset, and that value then is in that proposition.
Yeah, and I think and no one would say that, if you have your aircraft managed by ExecuJet in Cape Town, there's anything different to the service in Zurich. I'm just that perception.
And there are owners, of course, who have bought these aeroplanes, given it to their crew member and said, you take care of it. And I had one of the owners wanted to do that, and I think that that's a mistake, because you need independent oversight. When you're buying your aeroplane, you're not thinking about what its resale value is going to be much later on. But at the end of the day, you need to buy with that in mind. And I think particularly in Africa, and with those negative connotations that can come with owning an asset out there.
Okay, we've got 3 audience questions. Yes, no, will Nigeria continue to be the main focus?
The main focus of what?
Business aviation in Africa.
For the foreseeable future, I would say yes.
I would agree.
Okay. Which market is the most active? Rather than Nigeria, if you had to choose one other country to dedicate, the next 2 months of your business career in Africa, where would you choose?
Only because I know of a number of aircraft going into South Africa, and all, as I said, two brand new Bombardiers and a pre-owned Falcon 8X. I would say still Southern Africa. I think let's not forget Angola, Zambia, and of course South Africa.
Lesotho.
Yeah? Lesotho is good for other things.
Chris?
Yeah, I would say South Africa. In Angola, there's always kind of noise and it's kind of churning and some buying and selling and going there. And it's interestingly enough, with Angola, it's usually larger cabin aircraft, but much smaller numbers. But South Africa, if you could pick one country, for sure, just because.
I 100% would be prepared to dedicate 2 months down in South Africa, maybe Stellenbosch for a bit.
Cape Town, just for that.
Counts Bay, it's okay. Final question. Do we have any comments in the audience? The final question is a great audience one. What are the primary roadblocks? What's stopping it from reaching its potential? Chris?
I think it's the infrastructure. And then for aircraft owners, for them to be able to get financing outside their country and be able to move capital. I see that as a roadblock.
From my side, of course, stable governments and stable commodity prices is probably something that as a continent, it needs. And, then once those things are hopefully established, it then provides a little bit more of a safety net for financiers and people to look at it. So I really hope over the next 4 to 5 years that once we have a year in 2024 with so many different elections going on in many, many countries, that we start to get some stability on the continent. And I've always called it the great continent, and I continue to support it.
Chris, if currency restrictions is a major problem, why don't you just do Bitcoin financing?
That's a good question, but I really don't ever see in the foreseeable future for us to take that. It's just an added risk. We have a fund, we're not a bank, so we have a finite amount of capital, and there's no reason for us to burn calories in trying to make that work.
You could have so much fun.
Yeah, that's good. Come work for you. If it doesn't work.
I'll pay you in Bitcoin. Thanks so much. That was really interesting. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much.